Hello and welcome to What We've Learned. My name is Steve Kemish, and as ever, I'm joined by Shane Redding. Hello, Shane.
Hi.
How are we?
Really good.
Good, good. Well, we're here today, Shane, to talk about journeys and transformation, aren't we?
We are, yeah, looking forward to this one.
Yeah, me too. And it's an interesting one. Someone that you've met over since we've been away, between series one and two, where we've been doing other things. It's fair to say, but talking with Victoria Page, who's just started quite recently in May, in fact. So during lockdown, her new role as head of client experience at Capita, and we were keen to talk to Victoria to understand her journey, and as we'll come on to talk about with her, and some fascinating insights from her around her journey from more an analytical and even a programming background originally, business to consumer, and as she's moved into her business role at Capita. And we started, in fact, by asking Victoria to explain how her new role's going and what it's about.
Yeah, so I joined Capita in May of this year, and my role is brand new to the organisation in the marketing function. And it's head of client experience, which is really exciting because what we're trying to do is really focus our marketing efforts moving forward on the life cycle of a client with Capita and what that means, from a marketing perspective, how we deliver our experience to our clients. So it's been interesting joining during lockdown. I've met two of my colleagues, my director and my CMO, Antonia, when I was going through the interview process, and then everyone else I've met via, the good old Teams and video calls, which has been personally for me actually quite challenging. I'm a very people person, and I like to kind of interact face to face. So it's been
An interesting
fun.
start.
Yeah.
And you mentioned it's a new role.
Yeah.
Is that a new role because of environment? What was the trigger that Capita then said, look, we want to put this position in?
Yeah. So I would say over the past 18 months, really actually since Antonia joined Capita, they've been on, I hate to say the typical transformation word, but they've been on an evolution really with the marketing function. Historically, marketing was siloed in each division of Capita. And what has happened over that past 18 months really has been to centralise marketing as a function, but also put in place the right tools and technology to enable a holistic approach to marketing, a consistent approach. So this role was part of that overall bigger picture around changing and evolving the marketing.
It sounds like a
function.
classic big organisation. It's not a Capita thing, is that when you've got those divisions and silos, and I know as we spoke before we were recording, is that Capita's, for anyone that's not familiar, have grown greatly over the years via acquisition. So you've got all of these different business units that can naturally become siloed. So it's that big business problem of, I guess, trying to thread it all together so that if you are a client, you get that same experience. And Shane, you should come in here just with your experience on CX, customer experience of often it's, well, hold on, they treat me completely differently, even though they're the same organization. Is that what you found actually since you've been in May? Well, that's what I'm doing. Or is, as often is the case, what I thought I was doing maybe a bit different to that interview, that job description when I started?
Yeah, and the role, kind of the conversations that I was having at interview stage were more around this is the vision for marketing, what we want marketing's role to be and play in terms of actually, driving value to the business and being able to articulate what that value is. Quite often with marketing, it's seen almost as a nice to have activity, and with my background around data and I'm not a traditional marketer per se. I started out as a statistical programmer. That's not your normal path really into a customer experience, client experience or marketing role. But fundamentally that those were the conversations that I was having at that point, and it's quite fluid in terms of shaping what that looks like. I think there's a long road ahead in terms of how does that actually get embedded into an organisation such as Capita. I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of the complexity of the organisation, and to say that I was slightly naive, I think would be an understatement. Going into Capita, I didn't understand the complexity of the organisation in terms of that growth trajectory that they've been on, and what impact that probably has had on the client experience.
So Victoria, that sounds as though you have a few challenges, and it's also really interesting. And one of the things that I know that Steve and I really want to pick up on is your background and your career history, because as you say, it's perhaps not the straightforward one into the customer experience, not textbook, no. But I just, first for me, just listening to you talk about that is, what was the one thing that really most excited you about this role? And I know, you said it's not always what you expect when you apply for a new role, but what was the one thing you thought, oh gosh, this is really for me?
Yeah. Two things actually. From a selfish personal perspective, I wanted to use my experience that I've gained over my career with B2C and see how those learnings could be taken into B2B. And I think that for me was, having done some kind of work around B2B, but predominantly my career has been B2C, I saw a massive opportunity of taking those experiences really and applying it to B2B. Also, how often does one get an opportunity to work in an organisation that fundamentally is hitting every single industry and sector? My background predominantly has been utilities, so I wanted to go into a role that gave me that broad outlook on industry and sector. But I think from a more kind of Capita perspective, I brought into the vision actually around what they are trying to achieve, around really making marketing a sole driver of value and being that engine really that can really drive return on investment.
And that's very timely. I think it's really interesting. Lots of people talking about setting up a revenue operations function or marketing being the driver of value. And I agree with you, it's a very exciting place to be. And I love the fact that that buying into a vision, I think for anybody is really important, but perhaps more important than ever before for us to feel that we can align with that purpose. So I'm fascinated to find out a little bit more about where you started in order to get here. What was your very first job, Victoria?
So well, my very first job was, I won't take you to, I worked in a hairdresser's when I was younger, but was actually during my placement year at university. So I studied at Sheffield Hallam, and I studied quite a generic topic of management science. And I kind of fell into that actually. I wanted to do management studies, because I loved the kind of when I was kind of my dad was an operational researcher back in the days in he was in the nuclear industry actually, and he and I used to talk a lot about kind of management theory, but I ended up doing management science, which actually was very different to again what I was thinking it would be. It was very mathematical and very hands-on actually, and that's kind of led me down to the programming path. And I did my first job was at a company in Bracknell called Quintiles. They've rebranded recently, and it's a contract research organisation. And I worked in the biostatistics department, analysing clinical trials. And that was really, for me, set my degree in context, because I'd done all these case studies and historical papers around the government and scheduling of aircraft, and I couldn't see how all of this stuff was applied in the real world. So that year for me, working in clinical trials and actually understanding how that makes a difference in people's lives, it was a real eye-opener for me. So I returned there actually. I finished my degree and 2 weeks later I was back working for that organisation, and I stayed there actually for about 5 years in total.
Wow. And Victoria, that transition from programming and that more analytical, that scientific side of things into marketing, I'd be fascinated to know, did you wake up one day and go, right, okay, this is all too much, I'm going into marketing, I'm going to do some colouring in? Where was the transition for you there? And,
that's really funny.
And also, it'd be really interesting, back to Shane's point, and we'll come back to it, is you've got that transition from that scientific, that analytical programming base, very logical, to marketing, and then that B2C to B2B as well. I think it'd be really fascinating to pick on that, because lots of people ask me that aren't in B2B, what's it, is it the same? It'd be interesting to see your experiences there. But yeah, was it an epiphany? Was it a gradual pull? Did you get to wrong place at the wrong time? How did you end up in marketing from there?
Yes, so I always wanted to kind of utilize my analytical skills to make decisions fundamentally. How does analytics help to drive business decision making? And I think I got into a position, I moved up significantly from a career perspective quite quickly within Quintiles, but it was a very technical role, and I felt that whilst it was, I was progressing, I felt that I wasn't fully utilising all of my skill set, and also we were doing the analytics, but then passing it to the big pharmaceutical companies for them to then go and make their decisions off the back of it. And I wanted to be more involved in that process, and we just didn't have, that wasn't our role. We were an agency effectively. So I thought, well, how can I take these skills in terms of my analytics, but apply it in a way that actually helps make decisions? And that's when really I stumbled literally stumbled across an opportunity at 3, and it was a customer analytics and insight role in their sales and marketing function.
And that's 3, the mobile phone.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, 3
no,
mobile phone, yeah. And I was really fortunate actually, because the chap who ran that function had a similar background to me. He'd started out in pharmaceuticals as well, so could completely relate to the transferable skills. And really that was the big stepping stone for me to enter into a more marketing environment. Yet still, it was very analytical, but it meant that I could get involved in, translating that analysis into a story that played back to the business, so that they could then go and build their propositions or define their marketing strategy. And that for me was a real shift in my career.
So Victoria, I think that's really interesting. You mentioned that if you like, that lucky break of somebody who'd worked in the same industry, understanding those transferable skills. And I'm not going to ask you how long ago that was, but do you think that's something that's changed, that marketing departments are prepared to look wider and look at scientists or engineers because of those skills you bring? Or do you think there's still a bit of a lack of understanding of how transferable those skills are into modern marketing teams?
I think it's still got a way to go. I think also it depends on the function marketing, the role marketing plays in an organisation, as to whether people value those transferable skills around data and analytics. I would say over my time, I've definitely seen a shift around marketing becoming more data driven, which is great. But also, I think if you're in an organisation that understands that marketing drives value, then actually you will get more people that are analytically minded in those functions.
It's been an interesting shift, and you used a great word, translating, the ability to talk different languages to different functions within those roles. Back into Capita for a second, do you think that that role that you're in, that effectively sounds like to try and make sure that marketing's kind of front and center of everything, that therefore we need to show to the rest of the business perhaps the value of marketing, where it can really support? Again, does that skill set you've acquired help you there, that rather than often as a marketeer we can end up talking to other departments in marketing jargon and they just switch off, but you've got that translation ability to help with the more analytical, the numbers based, look, it might seem a bit fluffy, but here's the really important business or the data points that back up why your role and what you're trying to do is so important to an organisation like Capita's.
Yeah, and let's be quite candid. Capita's grown as a kind of sales-driven organisation, and there's an element of, if it's not broken, why fix it? If they're kind of performing their roles and that's how it is, how can marketing suddenly come in and help? So excuse me, I think there's definitely an education piece to say, it's not them and us attitude. Sales and marketing, working together to drive that outcome is actually really, really powerful. And how do we articulate to the business that focusing on the client can leverage value throughout that client's experience with you? And I think there's a tendency to look at those interactions with the client as siloed touch points.
I think that's a great point, Victoria. And I think you and I have talked before about some of the challenges of the data points in customer experience in B2B, and perhaps compared to B2C. And you're now in that wonderful position of, being able to use, I would imagine previously at Thames Water, very complex and also a huge volume of consumer data. I mean, how are you finding that comparison in the sort of data that you would have naturally turned to in B2C? Now, as you mentioned, actually those data points particularly might reside in different places in sales teams, rather than being e-commerce. What to you are the biggest differences in the data points that you might be using going forwards?
Yeah, in B2C, it's a luxury actually to have that vast amount of data that you can leverage to really understand the behaviour of your customers. And I think the complexity in B2B is the fact that you've got a diverse group of stakeholders that you're engaging with at lots of different time points across their life cycle with you as an organisation. And equally, internally within Capita, we've got a lot of different parts of the business also interacting with those clients as well. So how do you start to really bring those two things together? And that's been part of, some of the evolution of marketing that we've been going through, is how do you start to bring those siloed CRM systems together, so that you do have one view of the interactions that your organisation is having with that particular client, and also how do you start to, from a almost top-down approach, think about what experience do you want to deliver, how do you want to show up to that client. And I think these things haven't necessarily been top priority for B2B for a number of reasons. But I think the opportunity is huge once you start to bring all that rich kind of insight and interaction and data points together, because you really can start to influence and put strategies in place that starts to influence your client's behaviour for their benefit and for the organisation.
And just, it's a fascinating point again, because it's so obvious, right, in retrospect, that you've got that back history of being analytical. Data doesn't tend to lie, right? It doesn't exaggerate. It is what it is, and that's so important in any organisation. But when you've got those different divisions and functions and just natural silos that appear in larger organizations, you can make a point, and it's data telling what we should and shouldn't do, rather than subjective opinion or histrionics, etc. How's it been in these few months that you've been in Victoria? Because it's, I guess, with a very sales-led organization, as many B2B organizations would be, have you found that actually the help you can give is not so much just marketing, but to try and support the salespeople who are desperate for help because the way they sell has changed? That experience for them and those prospects or customers is fundamentally different 6 months later.
Yeah, so I think joining kind of mid-COVID, I didn't know what the business was like before. So I was I was in a unique position, really, because you don't have that, but this is the way we've always done things, because everything was kind of blown up in terms of, how do we go through this now? What is normal? I think what it showed me actually was that marketing suddenly was massively valuable, actually, because when you don't have the ability to be face to face with your client and have those conversations, you have to find alternative ways of reaching and engaging those audiences that you're trying to engage with. And we talk a lot about digital and how that's evolved over time and the importance of it, but ultimately that has been what has enabled organizations to keep going, and I think that realization has only helped the conversation around how does marketing support sales.
And I guess for anyone listening in that maybe hasn't had the same path as you, that might go, well, but that you're coming from the science angle, but let's not forget the art element. That learning doesn't stifle creativity, does it? It actually enables creativity, because you can use that to inform, well, look, this is how we change things to be creative in an environment where it's harder to stand out.
Totally. I think every organization had that, wouldn't say crisis of identity, but it was a little bit around, how do we differentiate ourselves at the moment that's credible and authentic. You mentioned the word authentic earlier. How do we go to market in this world where we need to support our clients and show up for them when they need us? So I think that was an opportunity actually to really differentiate and show the value that we play in not just customers' lives but our clients' lives as
well. So you get that virtual seat at the table.
Yeah, I love that virtual seat at the table Steve just said, but also that the whole thing about is so exciting about customer experiences is that making that difference. You can really see an outcome, and I'm just fascinated to know over your career in terms of taking perhaps some data points, being creative with them, turning them into a story, and critically making a difference to your customers. Are there any that you look back over your career in terms of that as being a greatest achievement? I don't know whether it was a campaign or something completely different that you're really proud of. So your proudest moment, if you like, in your career today.
Wow. I think what I get pleasure out of is knowing how something that I've worked on has actually made a difference to people's lives. Yeah, I think if I talk about my kind of value set, everything is around helping people. So I think where that has showed up greatest actually in my career has been at Thames Water, because there is something that, is all around us every day. You get up, you switch on your taps, you have your shower, and it's something that we take for granted, actually, in our country especially, that is a readily available, life required entity. So for me, it's being creative when we're trying to bring to life for customers how important that is to preserve and to look after, but also how it can bring us lots of joy in our lives as well. So if you think about those moments, having bath time with your children and really building the emotional connection, and that's something that we were building upon really heavily at Thames Water, is actually building a brand that people recognise that is so valuable, and it's a precious resource, and fundamentally we need it for us to survive. So I think being part of that kind of evolution within Thames to focus on our customers in a way that's never been done before. It was a massively engineering based organisation, so to really, I was there about 4.5 years, to shift that narrative internally and externally around the customer was probably my biggest achievement
so far, Victoria. But it's really interesting, isn't it? Because you take it, you do listening into you do take it for granted, and actually in the utility space, often from a client experience, I guess organisations like Thames Water typically hear from customers that point of crisis or frustration. Yeah. It's a really hard one for that client experience to always be right, because when we're not thinking, I don't wake up and think about water unless I haven't got it. You have to think very differently from your marketing communications in those kind of environments.
Definitely. And I would say actually you're shifting there between, having a marketing role where you're proactively communicating about the value of water, to actually also having a crisis role, a crisis communications role, when those things are taken away from a customer. So in my time, during my time at Thames, a lot of it was how do we ensure that customers feel supported, remove that anxiety around a crisis, and how do we ensure that the communication is relevant, timely, etc. But then also from the creativity perspective, it was how do we make people understand the importance and its complete vast approaches to how you engage your audiences in different ways at different time points.
And that sounds like a really great transfer into the environment we've just been. The last 6 months of COVID-19 and lockdown is that many organisations have had to think in that way for the first time, perhaps, of when's it appropriate to go out with a positive sales-led message in a time of change. Whereas, you know, Thames Water, if I have a problem, I'm not getting supply, then I don't want to get an email or a message in my virtual physical inboxes through letterbox trying to promote the value or upsell me to something. So that must be a great transfer into any organization, is they can learn from companies and spaces like utilities, perhaps more than they've considered.
Yeah, and I think that was one of, you know, the biggest bugbears actually around Thames, for me, being in the role that I was in, to say, you know, we're presenting ourselves in this way here. How do we be authentic and credible? You know, we talk about in the press, there's lots of conversation around leakage and, you know, fixing leaks, yet we're also trying to communicate to our customers to save water. You know, it's how do you join all of that activity up to present yourselves consistently and authentically as a brand? And it's a massive challenge for organisations to do that. But I think, you know, there's steps, fundamental steps that need to be in place to enable that to happen. And that's where you start to bridge that gap between creativity and, you know, more technical skills around, you know, what are those building blocks that you need to have in place around your data, around your technology. But fundamentally, you need the customer experience, people in your organisation to really lead the conversation around data and technology as well, because fundamentally it's all about outcomes. You're trying to drive outcomes for your customers, and not just focus on what technology is going to plug a gap.
So Victoria, you said something to me that resonates so much, which is that one of the reasons I'm so excited and passionate about B2B, appointing people as head of client experience, is because you just articulated that necessity to have the holistic view and to see it through your customer eyes. And actually, I think you mentioned earlier, you know, one of the challenges of B2B being very siloed, and actually, you know, if you're in a demand gen team, then you're all about, you know, the net new, and then there's another team that's about retention. You're not, as you say, looking at that arc or that life cycle of a customer and how they view an organization. You referred earlier to the fact that, you know, in B2B we have multiple stakeholders within one buying company, and they're all going to have very different views. So how do you, you know, you've got an even more complicated job to do. How do you bring that lens to understanding, if you like, the emotional side?
Yeah, and that's where actually having client side experience is really helpful, because I've been one of those decision makers around, you know, purchasing technology, for example, and I understand internally within an organization what that you know, politics actually is around the decision making table, and what the influences can be with certain stakeholders that have an interest in purchasing, you know, technology or a service from an organisation. So I think I use that. I draw on that a lot in my day-to-day role when I'm thinking about how do I want to communicate to certain people in that buying cycle? And also, how do I communicate to them at different time points through the buying cycle as well? And, you know, we do a lot within Capita around research and gaining insight on what that buying cycle looks like and how it differs as well for different industries, different sectors, different roles. And also, how does it differ now with the light of COVID? I've talked a lot about, you know, you making decisions based on insight and data. And I think one of our biggest challenges that organisations have coming out of COVID, if we can say we're coming out of it, is what insight can we use now? Because things have changed, and the insight that, you know, paper that we may have commissioned last year around, you know, buying behaviours might not stand true today in this world that we're living in. So I think it's fascinating because everything's unknown.
Interesting. And actually that insight's a really nice way for one last question to ask you, if we may, is, as you know, this is what we've learned. So we'll ask you what you've learned. People that might be listening to this, Victoria, are different stages of their career compared to you. Yeah. Is there a moment that you can think of, a single piece of advice that you've had or you'd give to others that has helped you on the journey you're on so far?
Great question. I think it's not necessarily something that somebody has said to me. I think it's something that I've naturally always done, actually, and that is to respect that you don't know everything and you never will, but you can always learn. And I think something that's inherent in my kind of behaviours, and anyone who knows me personally or professionally knows that I'm forever learning and reading and studying. And I think that's the way that, you know, we're going to have to evolve moving forward. There's no distinction anymore that you do your time in education and you go to university, and as soon as you've got that degree, you know, that's career just takes off from there. I think you've got to be constantly investing in your own learning to open up those opportunities, actually, because, you know, a career today is very different to what it was 20 years ago.
So that was really interesting hearing Victoria talk about her varied career. And I think somebody said the other day, which really resonated with me, is that, you know, nobody when they're at school says, oh, when I grow up, I want to be a B2B marketer. Yeah. Most of us fall into it by accident. But it was interesting hearing about that journey, and I think learning what Victoria's bringing into her new role from all of her experience. And that's her ending point about, you know, not knowing everything is something really resonates with me, because that's one of the reasons I love what I do. And I think you do, Steve, is that we're always learning, aren't we?
Yeah, I agree. I think my learning, it's wisdom of crowds is always a big one for me. And my stock phrase is, experience is not a monopoly on bright ideas, Shane. I think you can always learn from somebody, regardless of their career or experience length. And as Victoria articulated as well, that ability to transfer, we talked with her about that translation, but that ability to take experience from one part of the world, one industry into another one, there's always something to be learned and worked on, for sure.
And I think within that particular role of CX, particularly having that wide view, having balanced teams who've got breadth of experience, different things to bring, even more important, so you get that holistic view. But that there was one great takeout, which was sort of really resonating with some of the work I'm doing at the moment, about the point Victoria made, that we can't rely on our last year's database to give us the insight of going to tell us what our customers are going to be doing next year, because actually it's changing all the time. And I think just thinking about that and what that means for those of us that are using, you know, past campaign data, you using CRM data. And for me, my top tip is invest in looking at trend data and market research data. Market research, perhaps underused in B2B, but for your insights, it's so much more than just the data we already have. It's the data we don't know.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, Shane, because perhaps so if we rewind 6 months, we may have said, okay, the data and the research that we had before then would be okay, but we just need to wait until things normalize again. And of course, as I think we know now, in September of 2020, that the phrase new normal, it ceases to be. It's just back to this new way of working. So those data points, as you said, are potentially very dangerous to you, trusting that information is vitally important to get up to date. The other point I'd add to that as well is the flip side, Shane. Is it possible that you could end up building analysis from your last 6 months of programming, and as hopefully, touch wood, cross fingers, etc., as we ease out of lockdown to not back where we were, but to be more free in terms of sales and marketing, to meet people, the way that we market may change. You could also run the risk of building data hypothesis on your lockdown data, and that may not be relevant to you in the future. So it feels like one that really is worth exploring.
Yeah, I agree. Perhaps a topic for another time.
Yeah, very much so. I'm sure it would be. I think I really liked as well, and maybe I'm slightly biased, Jane, because as you know, my journey is not dissimilar to Victoria's from that more kind of analytical and technical ability to program and coming into the world of marketing. It's another takeout for me was and it links to her learning point, is you can always learn from other functions, but it may also be worth going over and educating yourself on different disciplines. If you can understand whether it's your sales colleagues or your more technical, your web team, your IT team, understands their language a bit better, it really helps with that translation when it comes to trying to collaborate with them.
Yeah, completely agree.
Good. All right. Well, look, Shane, thank you very much. But most importantly, thank you to Victoria, and thank you to listening in. So that's another episode from us. We will be back very soon with another guest to tell their story on what they've learned, and we'll share with you what we've learned from them. And between times until we next talk, anything else that Shane and I have come across that we think is of use to kick out onto this podcast. As ever, if you want to get in touch, you can via wwlpodcast.co.uk. That will take you to our LinkedIn page, where you can not only comment on this, but you can get in touch if you'd like to be involved, you'd like to recommend people that you'd like to hear from, or perhaps a topic or a theme that you think would be interesting for Shane, myself, and a guest to have a go at in a later episode. But for now, we'll bid you farewell and speak to you soon.